Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, what's up? Welcome in GC Live. Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark. Transfer portal season is upon us. We're going to talk about that a ton. We're going to talk about South Carolina's roster, South Carolina's needs, maybe a little high school recruiting as well, and maybe some big picture thoughts on the season too. But first, I'm going to tell you about our friend Clint Hammond of Movement Mortgage, clint.hammond.com. 803-771-6933 is how you can get in touch with Clint. If you're a home buyer, very, very simple. Call Clint. He's going to walk you through that process, find you a great interest rate, and also talk to you about what options you may have, as far as that mortgage goes. So Clint can tell you best. Just call him or check out more information, clint.hammond.com. Chris, portal doesn't open until December 4th. That is on Monday, but the Twitter streets are already just lively, you could say, man. It's crazy to think, where college football is now, and it's crazy to think. Like I guess we should be used to this each offseason now, but it seems like it gets wilder and wilder every year, and already some names out there to keep an eye on. Maybe in terms of South Carolina's interest.
Man, I was thinking about this before we came on. You and I have been at it for really about the same amount of time, like covering recruiting and college football. About what 2008, 2009-ish, I think, for both of us. And I was thinking about how different it was. Like you and I used to be able to call a recruit if we got a number on a recruit, and we could call them and like maybe be the only interview about, we used to be able to like break commitments more before the advent of social media. And then it used to be, man, that every single thing on the recruiting front all built up to this one single day in February. And now it's become, which I think it's honestly fun. You added the early signing period in 2018, and then you added the proliferation of, hey, a few more guys are starting to transfer now, and then you get the actual transfer portal. It's become, a lot more transactional. And honestly, this time of year is super busy, but I think there's a lot of fun to it too, right? Trying to, chase down names in the portal and trying to chase down, what is continuing to happen in the high school, on the high school recruiting front. So it's pretty fun. It's hard to actually fathom that the transfer portal is not open officially. Graduates are jumping in. There's guys that are saying, hey, when it opens, I am going to go in. You have reports of, hey, when it opens, this guy is going to go in. Speculation on some big time guys and then where they're going to end up. And certainly, even though it's not officially open, there are already several targets, high value targets, like you said, man, that South Carolina is heavily interested in, and some guys that we anticipate following and hearing more about as this process goes along.
Yeah, and then you can add in prospects who there have been reports that they are expected to go in, and then the player says, I haven't made up my mind yet. So there's another category. You know what, man? I don't want to, and I don't want to ignore the elephant in the room. So let's just address the elephant in the room right off the bat, because we're going to get a bunch of questions. What's up with KJ Jefferson? And so as much as today's college football world moves very, very Sorry, microphone going out again. I think y'all got me back.
Yep, we got you.
All right, yeah. So as much as the college football world moves incredibly fast, and it does, we're not going to put our head in the sand and be like, hey, that could never happen, or sort of just ignore what is out there. At the same time, I think it's safe to say right now at 2:07, November 29th, 2023, you know, KJ Jefferson to South Carolina is a little premature. Now, Chris, let's talk more generally as well. There's of course a possibility if you're South Carolina, when you just look at the quarterback room, that there's a possibility you take a transfer at that position. And we've not really addressed that specifically, but I stand by what I said before. There's not a spot on this entire roster that I would say would just be immune, like completely immune to taking an additional player if there's a guy who can help. So, of course, we've asked around about KJ Jefferson stuff. First of all, we need to find out for sure that KJ himself is entering the portal before it's even an actual discussion. Are the connections there obvious? Of course. Does South Carolina go into a bit of a transition period at the quarterback position once Spencer Rattler, officially moves on, which, I think we can all still anticipate? Yes. Do you have to talk about the possibility of taking an older guy who has experience? I think you do. I think all those things you discuss, in-house if you're South Carolina. But I do think we're just in social media world with this idea right now. We're in discussion idea with this idea right now among the fan base, not in Gamecock Central reports there's mutual interest between KJ Jefferson's space. Like, we're not saying that yet.
Yeah, and we Wes have we've got some guys, we meaning Gamecock Central in terms of our reporting, got some guys where we know South Carolina's interested in this guy, or there's mutual interest in this guy, and it's guys that are in the portal, right? Given what you said, let's go to the next question, because that may be a follow-up for some people. If KJ Jefferson goes in the portal, would South Carolina be interested? And like you said, there are ties there that you can't ignore. Dow Loggins was on the Arkansas staff when KJ Jefferson had his really good year in 2022, and South Carolina went to Fayetteville, Arkansas, and lost that game. And Rocket Sanders and KJ Jefferson had really big performances in that game, right? You also look at the fact that, look, if Spencer Rattler was coming back for another year, for year 3 in Columbia, we wouldn't be talking about a transfer quarterback, right? The Gamecocks do have, yes, a quarterback in Lenora Sellers who is extremely talented. And I want to be clear that I do believe he is extremely talented, but also want to be clear in that he has not started a game, right? Look at South Carolina's roster. There's not a lot of game reps in there at all. And so to take a quarterback, whether it's a guy that you feel like could come in and compete for the job, come in and win the job, a proven commodity, which despite this season, which didn't go how Arkansas or KJ Jefferson or anybody wanted, this guy is a proven commodity, right? So whether you're talking about a KJ Jefferson or, a quarterback from another school, it is something that, is worth tracking and you can understand, right? It would make sense if that happens. So let's not put the cart before the horse. You see this when a guy jumps in the portal, especially if there's any sort of tie. You got to wait and see. Remember Spencer Rattler, Wes? Before he even actually went into the portal, after the Texas game that he ended up, Caleb Williams came in. Before he even went in the portal, it was rumored he was going to go in the portal. And then it was rumored, hey, Shane Beamer used to be at Oklahoma. South Carolina needs a quarterback, right? That ended up being right. That ended up being what happened, but that was not correct at the time, right? A lot of different things had to happen. And so let's just see, with a situation like this or others that are going to come up, maybe not even at the quarterback position, maybe other positions, you always have to kind of wait and see how it plays out. And we don't have any answers right now for sure on that.
Yeah, and the Rattler thing, that thing went in about 3 circles before it ended up landing back on South Carolina anyway. So it was not there were people making that connection when we found out later on that basically it was the visit from Stogner to South Carolina that even truly piqued Spencer's interest in Columbia anyway. Go back and listen to Spencer talking about his time at South Carolina. He even said, "Hey, I never. There was a time when I never thought I'd be at the University of South Carolina." Now he said it's one of the best decisions he ever made. So, um, it worked out, but it's sometimes things end up being right, but they weren't right at the time. So, we'll see what happens there. We'll certainly be tracking it. I think there's arguments to be made for both sides of that, Chris. I also think look no further than this year at multiple positions as an example of why trying to have as much depth as you could possibly have is part of the conversation, right? Like you don't want to have a team where you rely so much on one guy that, hey, if that guy goes down, it kind of buries your season. And as we have seen, people don't care that you have had injuries when they look at your win-loss record, right?
That's
Like
right.
that people don't care for that explanation. They just don't. So now the other side of it is there's a heap of roster management sort of, how would this affect the quarterback room? Um, how many guys are in the quarterback room in a month? That's a question too, man. So, but here's the thing: every team in the country kind of deals with this, from time to time. And most off seasons, unless you just have the guy returning, and even then, you're trying to figure out, all right, if the guy is returning, can I keep my depth in place, until the guy moves on? So I
Right.
think, everybody deals with the roster management part of the quarterback position. We'll see what South Carolina does. You've got some. So basically, right now, I think you look at it. If we assume, the expectation, Rattler moving on, then you have Lenore Sellers in there. You have Doty, who kind of the last season has just played quarterback and receiver. So there's multiple roles you could see him in next year. What could Doty do with a full offseason actually completely learning the receiver position? I think that's a conversation worth having. Then, of course, you have Lenore Sellers, who was able to maintain his redshirt status this year. He'll be a redshirt freshman next year. Then, you have Tanner Bailey, who, basically, based on all indications, was behind Sellers this year. And then you have Colton Gauthier, who also we don't know his status, not going to speculate, but will at least academically reportedly graduate in December. So you've got there's a lot of different moving parts to the quarterback room. Chris,
Yeah.
I think real quick, I think the overarching conclusion to me is if you're South Carolina, you got to be kind of flexible and fluid yourself in giving yourself some options and kind of making sure you've covered all your bases. And it may be, hey, if this happens in the next few weeks, this is what we're going to do. If this other thing happens in the next few weeks, this is what we're going to do.
And you also, Wes, have to kind of project some of that sometimes, right? Because you've got different timelines that guys can leave, especially graduates, right? So of course, as a staff, you try to get a good sense for that. But and to be completely clear, in the clipping era, I'm giving this as a hypothetical, and I won't use names. But let's say I will use a name in one instance. Let's say that you as a staff would like to do exactly what you said, Wes, and that is let Luke Doty devote an entire offseason to playing receiver and special teams. And or let's say that's what Luke wants to do. Okay. Well, you got that. Let's say 2 quarterbacks transfer from your room and you lose Spencer Rattler. You got to refill this room, right? Now, maybe all that doesn't happen in the month of December, right? So you got to kind of look ahead. And you are bringing in a freshman quarterback in Dante Reno. You do have Lenore Sellers back. You've got some other guys on this roster, but what will it look like in December? What will it maybe look like before spring ball, after spring ball? You got to keep these things in mind. And so you don't have to stretch very far. It's not really making a leap to be able to conceptualize and understand if South Carolina ends up taking a portal quarterback. It's not like it would be some shock, right?
Mhm.
And I think both things could be true. So here, let me put this up by Travis real quick. Travis listens daily. Appreciate you, man. If we think Lenoris is a star, we should roll with him as he's a recruiting tool. So I think there's a few different things in there. It's a decent point. You can think Lenoris is a star, which I think most people around Columbia do, but is he a star immediately in game 1 of the 2024 season? That's a question to ask. Is he a recruiting tool? Sure. But next season is an important one, Wes, because you've got once again an incredibly difficult schedule. And at some point, it's about what can you do right now, beginning game 1, to go and win football games? Or what can you do to, it's probably an and/or, what can you do to bolster the depth in your room at a given position? And that's quarterback, and that's all the other spots on the roster. Again, this is such a pivotal offseason for maintaining your roster with your key core guys, young and old, but also adding to it through recruiting. Keep this 2024 class together, add a few more pieces from high school or JUCO, and then, of course, attacking the transfer portal. All of them super important this year.
Absolutely, man. So I think let's try to weave some of this together in some big picture football season thoughts. But I think that applies directly to the transfer portal conversation because you're kind of I think right now if you're a college football coach, you're trying to stack as much talent as you possibly can, which everybody is. But here's why I think it's a little bit different than it once was. We used to talk about needs when we were talking about high school recruiting. And if you had a need, it was like, all right, maybe you go JUCO here to add a little bit older guy. Maybe you get a transfer. But it was like those things were, I don't want to say few and far between, but they just weren't to the extent that they are right now by any means. And you might kind of, we saw this under Spurrier. I mean, they recruited some really good players, obviously, man, but it was very uneven at times. It would be like, hey, there's a need at defensive end. Let's go sign 7 defensive ends. It would just be like,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Load up. So I think you still build the core of your football program, the core of your football team with high school recruiting. And I think the way you do that is by putting together as many balanced, talented classes as you possibly can. And so I think that's like, all right, every class you take a high school quarterback. Every class you take a running back or 2. Every class you take, sometimes it may be a few more, but sometimes it may be a few less, but you want to take 3, 4, 5 offensive linemen every class, somewhere in that category. But then I think you got to use the portal with your direct areas that need immediate improvement. And, you also have to go into it with an acknowledgement that, hey, we're not going to fix all these areas in the portal, no matter how hard we try. You're probably not. And so there comes a certain level of development and bringing along your high school guys that have to be part of that equation as well. And so if we start with what was, I would say, ultimately the biggest sort of hampering element of this entire season, which would be to me pass pro and sort of the running game. And you say, how do you fix this? How does South Carolina fix this? I still think, especially on the offensive line, the path to having a successful offensive line is through high school guys who play, develop, spend time in your nutrition and strength and conditioning programs, and come along. Now we've seen offers go out to offensive linemen. Chris, I think those are more supplements. You're trying to supplement that group. If there's a guy who can help you, you go get him. But nobody is building a top offensive line in the portal. There's just not enough guys. It's not happening. Now, I do think this will be an improved O-line next year if you get the development you expect to get from some of these younger, highly talented offensive linemen that are already on campus. And in the case of Josiah Thompson, that will be coming in this offseason.
Yeah, that's the thing, man. I had somebody last night. We were in a conversation about how good Jaden Daniels has been for LSU, and I promise I'm making a Gamecock point here in just a second. But it was pointed out that their two tackles, their left and right tackle, are sophomores, true sophomores, and that they've been good. They're good kids. They're really good players. LSU obviously quite good on offense, not so good on defense this year. But not only they have Daniels, but they've got Malik Neighbors. They have their own version of Brian Thomas Jr. They have some running backs who are really good, as LSU always does. But they got these two tackles who were true sophomores, and they played quite well. It was pointed out that those guys played as true freshmen and took a lot of lumps and were a lot better for it this year. Bringing it to South Carolina, we know the Gamecocks played two guys in Tree Babalade, Trovon Ball, who ideally, Wes, they don't play that much, right? Ideally, they're not starting multiple games for you because they are freshman offensive linemen going against grown men. They already look like grown men, but they are still freshmen. You got Marquis Anderson on the shelf. So you have some young guys on your roster, a couple of them that have already been through the fire, thrown into the fire, battle tested, all those things. And then you've got some older guys who can get healthy, continue to develop. So if you can supplement by bringing in, a guy or two who can be, maybe they step in and win a starting role, and you're able to take a player who's younger and actually develop him a little bit more and just kind of let the chips fall where they may. We obviously saw that South Carolina dipped into their offensive line depth way more than they would have wanted to this year. So just building that depth, whether it's through JUCO, portal, development of players on your roster, both young and old, something you got to do, right? And so there are certain positions, I think you can segment these things, right? There are certain positions where there's a no doubt, like receiver for me is one. There's no doubt you got to go out if you possibly can. And the goal is let's find a starting caliber receiver to put on this roster. That's an obvious position. You've got some others where you could look at it and say, hey, if you could find a really good depth guy or a possible starter, I think you can kind of segment those out. But when you look on the offensive line, how do we categorize that one, Wes? Do you need a definite starter if you can find one? Do you need more depth? Portal offensive line recruiting, kind of hard, right? Because the guys that are good enough to come in and play, they're at a premium, right? They got competition all over the place.
Well, and I think if you segment it even further among the position group, finding true SEC starting offensive tackles in the portal is very, very difficult, which is why I think it's massive that South Carolina has gone out, landed a Tree Babalade, landed a Josiah Thompson, landed a Cam Pringle, going out, getting high upside high school offensive tackles. Jatavius Shivers, I mean, talking to people around the program, he obviously is not quite as far along maybe as some of those other guys, but there is some positive buzz, I would say, about him as well. So you have gotten some core guys, I think, to build around there. At offensive line, I think for me, if I can find a guy in the portal who, obviously if there's a sure starter and he wants to come, you probably owe it to yourself to just go get him. I don't think there's a guy out there that fits that yet, that is just like beating down the door to come here and would be a definite starter. So to me, if there's someone who can maybe be along that fringe of, hey, they're going to push for a starting spot. If they don't win it, they can be a backup. Um, you maybe do look at that. And, I think you're going to try to build some depth, but it's going to be hard. I'm going more big picture here. I talked to the parent of a player who is in the portal from elsewhere, and they're a graduate, and basically it was, hey, I the sense was, why go somewhere if you're a 1 year guy where you're going to be a rotational guy, or you're not, you're going to be a depth piece. No, if you're a 1 year player, you want to go start.
That's right.
This is your last chance. So, I think if you're South Carolina, if you're really anybody, you can probably fill some depth spots throughout kind of your roster. If you can pick the right guys who, a lot of times I think you want to find guys who are from around your area, so a chance to get back home, that have multiple years of eligibility left. Maybe they've been playing at a lower level, but have shown, hey, they're a little bit better than that, but are okay fighting for a position. I think a 1 year guy, unless it's just a dream to have played at South Carolina, or they're just dreaming to play in the SEC, sometimes those guys are hard to find. So I think you kind of, throughout the roster, you want to add depth at multiple spots. To move it forward, you mentioned receiver. You got to find a couple of guys who could start there, I think. And Chris Mitchell, to me, there's going to be a lot of receivers in the portal. There always are. You can find receivers in the portal, man. At this early time, though, Chris Mitchell is the one that you're just like, all right, what do we got to do? Like, this guy would be exactly what the doctor ordered, I think, for South Carolina.
He would be. I mean, you're talking about a guy that is experienced. He's a great kid. There's no issues. He's got a brother that plays for Mississippi State, another brother that's committed to a Power 5 school. Graduate, right? Going to be a graduate. Academics are in order, and super productive. I mean, he's a fast kid who's gotten it done when they've played big competition. He's gotten it done consistently. Set the FIU single season receiving record, Wes, and is a guy that as soon as he jumped in the portal, there's a line out the door, to try to meet him. And he'll take some visits. South Carolina certainly heavily interested in him. There are others. There will be others. Still a little early to know if there will be any traction between Mitchell and South Carolina. We'll see. But certainly they are trying to get in it. And he is one of those portal guys that kind of seems like a no-brainer, right? That wherever he ends up, we're going to look back and say, hey, Chris Mitchell went to that school for his last year and he balled out, and now he's on the way to the NFL. I mean, this is a guy that if he left this year is a draft pick somewhere. For him, it's about getting somewhere, raising his stock even more at a bigger school, kind of proving his worth at an even higher at a Power 5 level. Really good player, man. And South Carolina and others, trying to stay involved there with him.
Yeah, and I don't know, man. I have no idea if this could be the case, but you do kind of wonder, Mississippi State, if his brother's there. Is his brother an underclassman, like has years left? Do you know?
I believe so. Yeah. Let me effort that just to make sure, because I don't want to
New
speak out of
offense,
turn.
some new excitement. By the way, let the Mississippi State hire with Lebby, that has the potential. Don't don't get fired up yet, y'all. But that has the potential to have an effect on South Carolina. Potentially, and I'm just doing exactly what I said for everybody not to do with KJ Jefferson and connecting dots. But you would think that would be a potential landing place for him. At the very least, you would think Mississippi State would be able to get him on campus. Hey, come check it out. Well, a lot of people have asked us, Chris, about Daniel Hill and what's the latest there with him not making it in. There has been a little bit of speculation. I would say more talking to someone yesterday, informed speculation, not to completely count out Mississippi State re-entering the sweepstakes with Daniel Hill, who did not make it to South Carolina this past weekend for a visit. I think if he had made it in, you lock it in, lock it down. He's going to South Carolina. He didn't make it in. Now, Chris, to complete the circle here, I was also told, hey, he's still leaning to South Carolina. Like, that's where it's believed to be, that Hill wants to be at South Carolina. But we all know about the preference, at least from one family member, for him to end up at Alabama. He's actually a Mississippi State legacy. So Mississippi State, I feel like, Chris, has kind of been in the mix more as a courtesy than anything to this point. But with a new head coach and a new offense and a guy who has put some explosive offenses out there, that may be something to keep an eye on there. So I think it is interesting. We're all talking portal, but there's still some high school recruiting and some JUCO recruiting to be done in the next 3 weeks as well.
There's no doubt. Yeah, we're so focused on the portal that you forget about Daniel Hill and holding on to some, members of the 2024 class and a JUCO defensive tackle. Jerome Simmons, South Carolina doesn't have a defensive tackle, West committed right now. So several guys still out there. Nick Mitchell, by the way, West, Chris Mitchell's brother at Mississippi State. They're both from Jacksonville. He is actually going into his 4th year there. So there is eligibility remaining. I don't even think we need to source the fact. I'm pretty sure if Jeff Loby and his staff look at Chris Mitchell from FIU, they're probably interested, right? Just like,
yeah, he has an offer. We can just
they would probably take him, would be my guess. And West, Will Rogers. How about that one, right? That's kind of fascinating. It's a guy that's talented, put up big numbers in the transfer portal for Mississippi State. Wouldn't he do numbers in that offense though? Kind of intriguing. He should go back 1 year. We'll see. Hey, maybe that happens. We've seen that before. Coastal Carolina, Grayson McCall in the portal.
Yeah.
Another one. We kind of tracked that a couple years ago. Remember, there was some talk about him. So lot of talent already in the portal, and I have a feeling we're going to see more. Still, it's stupid to say I have a feeling. There will be more. There will be a lot of talent, but there may be some shocks, right, that go in like across college football. That's kind of been a theme among people who cover these things pretty closely from a national perspective, that there may be eventually, when the portal fully opens, some really big names that jump in. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, dude, I thought about tweeting out yesterday, hearing some big names around college football are entering the portal. That seems to be the thing to do these days. Like, yeah. I'm hearing there's going to be some big names in there.
Yeah.
Well, no
kidding. No kidding.
Obviously. All right, y'all. Let's Chris, why don't you tell everybody about Trey Harrell before we move along to some other positions?
Yeah, I'm going to put up Trey's graphic here at Trey Helps. Me saying, what is that? What is at Trey Helps? That is Trey Harrell's social media handles. Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok is where you can follow him. He is an auto accident attorney right here in the great state of South Carolina, and actually has been voted the best personal injury attorney by the readers of the Post and Courier. Great guy, very helpful guy, because he can help people that are injured in auto accidents all over Gamecock country. You can find him online, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Trey Helps, or online at attorneyherald.com. Of course, everybody, Trey, Wes, myself, we all hope that you never are injured in an auto accident. Tough place to be in. But if you are, you want somebody who can fight for you, somebody who knows the law, who can fight to get what you deserve, who can protect your rights. So you want an attorney who helps. Remember that Trey Harrell helps, and he can help you if you are in that situation or one of your loved ones, friends, family members. At Trey Helps, Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok, or attorneyharrell.com.
And also, I'm going to go ahead and tell you all about our friends at Game Time and the Game Time app. Of course, we've all been in a spot where you have struggled to find tickets. I've told y'all multiple times before. I was in the same spot a couple years ago with the World Series. Wanted to go to Atlanta, wanted to see the World Series in person. Tickets were not available. I downloaded, before we even had this sponsorship, downloaded the Game Time app. That was the easiest way to get tickets, and it's the easiest way for you as well. Download Game Time. Also go to gametime.co, not gametime.com, gametime.co, or just download the app. And sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't. There you go. Basically, it's just like most of the other apps you've seen, and that you type in what you're looking for. That could be concerts, it could be sporting events. This time of year, there's all types of events going on. Hit the tickets on here, and right now, if you use the code Gamecocks, you're going to get $20 off your first purchase. And also, one of my favorite things about the Game Time app is that if you find, it's the Game Time guarantee. If you find the same tickets in the same section for the same game or event, and they're cheaper elsewhere, they're going to refund you for 110% of the difference there. So, of course, some rules do apply as far as that promotional thing. Go check it out, though. GameTime.co. Type in the code Gamecocks. Appreciate Game Time being a sponsor of this show and many more around the On3 network. Chris, what do you make of the South Carolina defense in 2023?
Wow. Okay. I had to, I'm like, did he get are we going forward and did you get the year wrong? Or are we looking back to 2023? I just had to make sure there. That came out absolutely nowhere. Have you been planning that for a while?
No, I wanted to switch it ahead to
Okay.
defense. I wanted to switch it. This ultimately is getting into the needs conversation.
Yes.
And the portal conversation. But I think to get to that conversation, you got to start with what we just saw. And it, in some ways, can be hard to kind of make sense of it, I think, man, because there was a time this year where everybody's saying, hey, the defense just, frankly, has not been able to stop anybody for a stretch. And then some of it was opponent dependent, but they settled in, man. There's no doubt they played better down the stretch. They got some guys in some spots, I think, asked them to do some things that maybe fit their skill set just a little bit more. Getting Bam Martin-Scott on the field, I think was big. Getting him back potentially would be big. So I'm kind of a little bit torn on where I think you go portal-wise with this defense. But again, I think you have to start with what we just saw from the defense.
Yeah, man, there's a lot to unpack there. And I will tell you, I don't know why, where my head went first. So there was a point early in the season, mid-season, where I'm going, you got to go out and get a nickel, right? And you probably need to go out and get a corner. So to me, the question is, you move Jalen Kilgore over. You really played 4 guys at nickel, 5, heck. I mean, Kawan Banks played a decent, not a decent, he played some nickel for this team. But Keenan Nelson Jr. was your game 1 starter. Nick E played there. DQ Smith played there. Jalen Kilgore played there down the stretch. And still a freshman, I think, going to get a heck of a lot better. And he already had a really good year, Wes. So between safety and nickel, have you kind of found your combo there? Like, how does the staff feel about that? Obviously, you're losing Marcellus Dial, who I think kind of quietly had a really good year for the most part. You'll likely get OD back. You'll likely get Judge Collier back, right? And then you've got some young guys, Emory Floyd, Vakari Swain. So does that change the equation? Maybe. I think if there's a big time like nickel type that goes in, maybe you still take a look there, right? Corner might be something that's a little more intriguing right now. Then I look at linebacker, Wes, right? You're going to have, Debo Williams and Stone Blanton back and Putt Power back and Bam Martin-Scott you can get back. I think the obvious one is at edge, right? So You're bringing in Dylan Stewart, who's a 5-star. You've got some guys that you can return that have played a good bit for you. You have the 3-3-5 in the back of your mind that you can continue playing some of that if you keep that in the scheme, if you keep the same defensive scheme. But it is a fascinating question because I feel like with offense, there's some really, really obvious answers as to what you need. You need a receiver. You might need a quarterback if we'll just leave it at that. You need running back help from the portal. There's some kind of obvious things there. But defensively, you need to improve and get better, but it's kind of like, what are the priorities? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. I think, like you said, edge or just give me. I don't care what you call them. Give me a defensive lineman who is highly disruptive, and whether he's
Whatever that means.
whether he's edge, whether he's more like of an inside guy, 3 technique, a true shoot. If there's a true nose tackle that wants to roll into town and just take up double teams all game, I'm interested. I'm making the call if I'm South Carolina. I think this defense, much like the roster on the whole, has a nice core of some guys you can build around. I think what it lacked and what we saw when South Carolina faced better offenses and was not able to create those turnovers that they have so relied on. I think what they lacked was the true, consistent, just difference making guys. And, I think we saw Nick Eamon sort of the final bit of the year kind of get back comfortable again and make some of those plays I think we all envisioned from him. He's potentially one of those guys. So I'm not saying the player I'm talking about or the players I'm talking about, I'm not saying those guys aren't on the roster, that they can't become that. I think Kilgore, there's a great case to be made that he's a future all SEC guy. But I think you just need more difference makers on this defense to sort of insert them in there with this core of guys you have. Dylan Stewart's coming in. You hope he's a day one difference maker. That's hard to do though. It's not
Mm-hmm.
easy. And
Yeah.
so, dude, if there's a lockdown cover corner out there, a guy who can come in and just, hey, that side of the field is taken care of if we're in man coverage. And, I actually would be very, very, that to me is like quietly one of my bigger potential needs within this program, within this roster, unless you just feel that good internally about continuing to bring along, OD Fortune into a even bigger role this coming year. And then, of course, Judge Collier, Emory Floyd, who played a little bit more down the stretch, and Vakari Swain, of course, who I still think could have a future at receiver if that was the path they decided to take. I think there's a lot to really consider, at cornerback. They, not that they ever could have not that they necessarily could have gotten him, but I thought it was interesting last offseason, Chris. We saw them go for a couple of nickel types, it seemed like, in the portal. But then the kid that was from Rock Hill, that Cypress,
Mm-hmm.
you know, came from Virginia, right? And then he goes to Florida State. They never really offered or went after him. It didn't seem like. So, I think if there's a guy out there that makes sense at that spot, that could be big for this defense.
To me, Wes, I there are myriad issues with the defense when they weren't at the points where they weren't playing well this season. But man, I can't help but trace a lot of it back to disruption up front, like you said. You think about Shane Beamer. I'm thinking back to the Mississippi State game. South Carolina gave up a gob of yards to Will Rogers and Tulu Griffin, who had, over 200 yards that game. There were a lot of balls thrown over South Carolina's head, things like that. And he wasn't happy about that, but I remember he lamented more than anything, hey, you can't give the quarterback 10 seconds to throw back there, right? And
Mhm.
so that when you can't get home with 4 or even 3 sometimes, what does that mean? Well, you got to bring extra guys. And when you bring extra guys and you don't get there, you can be in a heap of trouble. And so you think back to some of South Carolina's best defenses. Yeah, they had really good players in the back end, but it was the front 4 and the ability to rush those 4 and cause a lot of havoc that, really set the tone for everything. And so more disruption up front, whatever form that takes. I totally agree with you. Whether you're looking at high school recruiting, portal, JUCO, that's got to be an area of emphasis. And, you think about a big time pass rusher, Wes, that's going to be viewed just like a big time portal quarterback, a big time offensive tackle. Like that's one of those premium positions where if a really good one goes in, everybody's going to want him. Right. And so that increases the competition, but it is a need for sure, because that's an area where you can tell they've got to get better, just disrupting whatever form that looks like up front.
Yeah, and I think you look at quarterback, obviously a premier position, but it seems like, dude, you got those guys bouncing around like crazy. Like there's lots of quarterbacks out there now. It doesn't always work out, when they transfer around. But what do you think? I mean, certainly quarterback, offensive tackle, and then true edge rusher. That your 3 like most difficult to find spots? Like it
Probably
probably
so.
matches up pretty well with the NFL
Yep.
too,
Yep.
you know?
I think so.
Um Now cover corner, like a true fluid, you know, athletic, open hips, like a guy that can just go lock you down at cornerback. That certainly is a premier need, I think, as well, as far as premier positions go. So I don't know. They're not easy to find. Point being.
Not at all. Not at all. But South Carolina's in the position where you need to get better there. And look, again, some of that you may not be able to solve that fully through the portal. So some of it is going to be you got to get better, and that includes development, of your current roster members. A guy like Desmond Umeozulu, who, played as a true freshman this year some, and will, I would think, be counted on a lot more next season to take a step forward.
Yeah, he played just really primarily only as like a rotational guy, some special teams, but I think you look at him and you're hoping he can be one of those dudes that makes one of those big jumps, from year 1 to year 2. Let's see. We haven't talked about running back a ton, man, but that's another spot where I think you can obviously find guys if you get creative. I mean, Mario Anderson stepped up and was, really like fairly productive for South Carolina considering the lack of room to run, at times. So you can get creative and find guys. I think the next step there, though, for one, you want to have a little bit more depth, man, to where you're not sitting there having to, preseason move Joyner to that spot, or then you play Braswell. If there's more depth there, he probably redshirts, I would think, just based on what we saw. And so you want to add depth, but I think ultimately the question is, can you go get a kind of difference maker at that spot as well? And where is the line? I think running backs they're not as valued certainly in the NFL as they once were. And some of it is dependent on giving them room to run and stuff like that. So, but also let's be clear, there are some running backs that are just simply better than others and need less room to make something happen. If you are the O-line South Carolina had this past year, it would have gone a long way to have, a Marcus Lattimore back there just, pushing the entire pile at times.
Finding ways to get it done. Yeah. No, you're right. That would make a big difference. And I think, for all the talk that we've had about being better up front on offense and defense, obviously a big priority. But when you look at the best teams, Wes, and did you see Texas A&M's list of things that they look for in a coach? Right? It was like it was basically like score more points than the other team. Like it was every single thing that like this is how we're going to build a championship program. It was like all these different things, and the retort afterward was like, I mean, obviously. So this is going to be kind of obvious. Like teams that win championships, they're generally good everywhere, right? But they have a lot of guys that are just better than your guy at the skill positions. Because sometimes, even if you've got a great offensive line, quote unquote, you're going to get blown up sometimes if you play really good competition. Um, Even if you're a great quarterback, you're going to have tight window throws. Receivers are going to face good coverage. To win at a high level, you've got to have guys where they can just make your guy miss, run through a guy, run around a guy at the receiver position, at the running back position. And you're right. We can look back this year and say, hey, South Carolina lost up front in this game, but you can think of a lot of instances where there were one-on-one opportunities and the other team won, and there's some of both of those. South Carolina won some of those battles too, but the best teams have bailout players, right? It's 3rd and 7, 3rd and 10, and it's time for somebody to make a play and they're going to make it. And so I think, yes, the trenches are very important, but finding more players at receiver, at running back that are just one-on-one big time skill guys, that's something you got to add. And again, through the portal and through high school, you got to do both of them from a long-term and a short-term standpoint.
Yeah, that's the key, man. There's got to be a balance. I think you can't. It's not sustainable to just try to build your whole team out of the portal, but it's also hard to stay. It's hard to stay on a competitive field, I think, if you go, the Dabo route and just say, at least for a stretch there, it seemed like they didn't want to use the portal at all. I think I saw on Twitter they've offered a portal offensive lineman, but I think the balance is key. Balance is key in everything in life, I think, and this is no different. So you got to balance the roster out. You got to balance how often you go high school, how often you go portal, and the newest thing is you also have to balance kind of how the NIL money works as well too. So it's a new world, I think, as far as all that stuff goes, man. Let's see. Is there anybody else on the list that we want to just dive into a little bit like we did Chris Mitchell? Does anybody else on here rise, Chris, to the level of, I don't want to say that they're worth talking about, because all these guys are worth talking about from the fact they're good players. But I do think it's a point worth pointing out. We also made this point on the radio. Anybody who's even a watch list guy right now, it's kind of very, very preliminary in saying, hey, we think there's some mutual interest here. But there's going to be so many new names on this thing. I mean, South Carolina may sign nobody from the initial list that we've put out there. This thing is going to be very, very fluid. But there's certainly a couple of guys you can maybe be monitoring. Chris Mitchell being the one that I think is just kind of the dream edition at this point.
I've got one that I would like to bring up right here and now. So a familiar name to some hardcore recruiting followers, Wes, Matthew Bedford from Indiana is an offensive tackle who's from Memphis originally, played at Cordova High School there, and very nearly came to South Carolina as part of the 2019 class when Will Muschamp was here. Instead, committed to Indiana, which seems, you're like, well, that's kind of random. Yeah, it is. It's kind of random, but he's a guy, Wes, that has started a lot of games in his career at Indiana and has played quite well, from my understanding. And is also, here's kind of the kicker, the bonus cherry on top. He started games at 4 positions. So left tackle, left guard, right tackle, right guard. He's played everything but center for the Hoosiers. And he's a guy that my understanding is South Carolina's interested. I don't know if he's interested this time around, but he's at least familiar with South Carolina. He's visited before a few years ago. He knows about South Carolina. So it's not like it's a foreign concept where you're kind of going in. So as we continue to know that they are, as we know that they're looking at some offensive line prospects, Jalen Travis from Princeton is another. There's some Ivy League guys, obviously, in. This is one that I think might be worth monitoring. Again, we could find out in 5 minutes that Matthew Bedford has no interest in South Carolina at this point. But given the connections in the past, I think one to watch.
And I think, man, somebody with that type of versatility is exactly what I would be looking for in the portal on the offensive line. Because then it could be, all right, which spot is he most needed? Slide him right in. We all saw the evidence of what injuries can do to that group. I don't even call O-line a position. It's like a group. And I think for that, you got to have some guys who can slide around and there not be a huge drop off. And so for South Carolina, you certainly feel like you have guys coming back that are going to be your future offensive tackles, I think. But having an insurance policy in that, I think goes a long way as well. So also just your pure numbers there, man. Some of that's going to be decided by what do some of these older players that actually do have eligibility left, what does it look like for them moving forward? Does a Jalen Nichols come back? I mean, that's I think a huge part of this equation moving forward. So lots to wait and see there, but you can kind of see the makings already of what that group might look like. And it would look just a little bit better if you could supplement it with one more talented and maybe older, experienced player. That is the one thing you notice, man. Looking up every time a guy gets an offer or we hear there's interest, I pull up their bios and I pull up their PFF. All these guys have played a ton of snaps in their careers so far. So you're talking about some just huge levels of experience so far.
Yeah, big levels of experience. And to go back to Nichols, that's an interesting one. I think you ever heard of this, been reading about this lately, like shiny object syndrome, where you kind of look at something that's new and cool. I think at times there's a temptation to do that with the portal, and I'm a huge advocate of the portal, right? Using it, players using it, coaches using it to supplement, to make your team better. I actually think it's really cool and it's fun to track sometimes, Wes. But I think there's a temptation to go, need offensive line help, go grab this offensive lineman. And in some cases, that is a good idea. But hypothetically, you can take like the fact, like if Jalen Nichols comes back, which I think is Wes right now where we sit at 3:00 on Wednesday, November 29th, 2023, more likely than not. But you take that, and then if that likes announced, people are like, oh, okay, cool. Jalen Nichols is coming back. That's good. And if you landed a guy who's like an all conference performer at left tackle from a smaller level and you put him, it's like, oh man, big time offensive tackle, right? Whereas Jalen Nichols has started and played well at times at South Carolina. So I think kind of keeping your eye on the fact that a lot of times retaining players who do have some proven production and can still get better and have experience and are already familiar with your place, already familiar with the type of competition that you play. I think that's important not to lose sight of those things either, even though the portal is a great resource and tool.
Well, dude, I just remember looking last year. We're like, man, South Carolina needs an edge guy. South Carolina needs a running back. And I'd sort of just check in on who are the top 50, transfer portal uncommitted guys or whatever, or who the top 50 overall portal guys. You'd be like, running back. Oh, Marshawn Lloyd. They can sure use that guy. It's like
Yeah.
literally, there's Jordan Birch. It's like the guys you really, it would have been nice to get somebody new, but the guys you really needed were the guys that left. So, but you could have used both those guys quite a bit this season. Let's be honest. And it's easy to say, well, if they want to go, as a fan. But at the same time, The name of this game, the people who are really going to win the portal, Chris. Yeah, you can have a great year. You can be Florida State. You can go out and you can take that jump using the portal. At the same time, in long term, the people who win the portal are going to be the schools, in my opinion, that recruit well in high school and retain their guys from ever entering the portal. I think that's got to be priority number one.
Yep, it's a great thought. I mean, being able to be smart with NIL dollars, retain players, go out and supplement and get some big quote unquote free agents to kind of if you're kind of thinking about the pro model, I think that's significant. Like the Atlanta Braves have come up lately. I think we were talking about them today. They don't have the biggest payroll, Wes, and they don't have the biggest payroll. They spend some money, not the biggest payroll, but they've been able to take their core and lock in a really good core. And not just go chasing free agents year after year after year, but they've gotten some free agents that have been critical, and they've been quite good lately. So, for a school like South Carolina that's not going to have Texas A&M money, I think that has to be, built in as part of your approach.
Yeah, for sure. All right, y'all, we got to get out of here, but finally going to tell you about our friends at Liberty Tax right here in Columbia. Chris, did I understand that you ran into Larry of Liberty Tax himself yesterday?
I sure did. Our man Larry, he's a community man, Wes. He was out at the town of Irmo tree lighting, and he's been a sponsor of that for years. And he had his tent out there. He's giving out cookies and cupcakes to the kids. Almost like a Santa Claus-esque occasion, Wes. Just giving out stuff to all the kids. And you know what else Larry gives out? If you want to work with him, really awesome tax returns. He does an outstanding job. His team at Liberty Tax, 2 locations in Irmo, they support the community. And wherever you are, give him a call, 803-462-5576. He can help you out. We've been in contact with him very, very often, my family, helping us out with our taxes, making sure that we have a good handle on what to do, what we're looking at, what our plan is for 2024. He can do all that for you. So make sure you give him a call. Support those who support us here on GC Live.
Yeah, man, we appreciate Larry. 803-462-5576, like Chris said. And like I said, we're out of time, but we'll hop on at some point later on. This thing, it ain't slowing down anytime soon. Don't know if we'll have a Friday show. Might have to take Friday off from old GC Live. But hey, guess what? Portal opens for real on Monday. So there'll be a 30-day just absolute madness push. And we're going to have complete coverage for you on GamecockCentral.com. If you're a new subscriber and you want to try us out, use the code SCAR1. Again, I didn't create it. I know some people hate the SCAR initials. SCAR1. You get 2 months for $1. Come check us out. GamecockCentral.com. If you're already a subscriber, if you're a longtime listener on here as well, man, we really, really, really appreciate all the support. Good to see our guy Wade in here, by the way. Wade doesn't always get to join us live, but he did today. Appreciate the support as always, Wade, and appreciate all of our normal folks. I saw Still Curtin in there. Travis is in here most days, bringing some knowledge. So Frederick Cooper, R.L. Smith, our man Nectarios. So we had sure I missed some folks. We had some of our regulars in here. Appreciate y'all. But yeah, y'all have a good one. We'll be back soon, and we'll talk to you then.